This is amazing. You know, I first started doing plant-based eating 15 years ago. You guys weren't around. Where was everybody? I was like all alone in Houston. I was like, oh my God, food matters. And a hamburger isn't some happy cow. Doctors looked at me like I was crazy, and restaurants were like, oh, you're vegan? Do you want a chicken sandwich? Now, I just moved back to Houston a year ago, and I can't believe the difference. My friend Jeff, by the way, shout out to Jeff doing our video, and he's got a YouTube channel. He's got a YouTube channel called VeganLinked, where he interviews different vegan doctors and things like that. And so he's in town. He's like, oh, I've interviewed 25 different vegan doctors. I'm like, 25 vegan doctors? That's crazy. I didn't know there were any vegan doctors out there. And he's like, oh yeah, there's 40 restaurants in Houston. I was like, seriously? I just go to Chipotle and get the soy fritas thing. So it's really a pleasure to see this, a place that's talking about mindfulness and peace and wellness. This is not, usually it's a different setting for me, right? Usually, I mean, those of you that follow me on social media know that I'm usually pretty angry, not so mindful and peaceful, because people are talking about subjects that I actually know quite a bit about and they don't know anything about, and yet they are all of a sudden the experts on it. But yeah, it's a pleasure to come talk to you about a topic that's near and dear to me, and that's obesity. And it's important for us to all know about it, because it's not a problem that any of you guys are dealing with, but it is a problem that we are dealing with from a society level, and that we really need to understand that it's a disease and the treatment of it. And it's a topic I want to talk a lot about, because for many years I was treating obesity just as a surgeon. And when you're a hammer, all the world's a nail. And my treatment for obesity was simply a knife. I guess I didn't really even think of it as anything but a solution where I had a knife to fix. But one day I went to get a life insurance policy test. And at the time I was overweight, and my life insurance policy test was terrible. I had fatty liver, I had hypertension, I had very high cholesterol. And of course I go to my buddy who's a medical doctor. No problem, right? We're so used to disease, it almost seems common sense that you're gonna get it. Oh, you got high blood pressure? Of course you do. We all do. Take this medication, and when you have this complication from that medication, we'll give you this medication. And I know how it is, because my patients come in and we have to add pages for their medicine. You know, it's like, when you filled out the whole page, use the back for the rest of your medications. And so I started thinking about this, and I was like, were we born, did God give us a lemon, or evolution give us a lemon of a body? Were we built to fail? Or was there another way around? And I went crazy. This is me like taking over our dining room table. My wife took this picture because she thought I had lost it, where I just like started studying every paper in the literature about nutrition and health. And that led to me writing a book called Proteinaholic, which was mentioned, where I really kind of dive into this problem with protein. And we'll talk a little bit about it today, but I want to talk more about obesity. But the thing about doing that, about doing all that study, is it left me in this very weird situation. I look at the hospital and I think 85% of the people in this hospital are there because of what they eat. 85%. It's because of what they eat. And I'm treating it with medicines and surgery. Is that the right thing to do? Because most of my days, I'm going to talk to you about nutrition, but most of my days are spent looking like this, you know, with surgery stuff on. And I do massive surgeries where I rearrange intestines. And why do I do that? And how do I feel about that? Because I know what the real answer is. It always reminds me, who are Star Trek fans out there? Do you remember the time that they went back to America, and it was like the 1980s, and one of them needed a surgery? I think he had appendicitis. The doctor is about to operate him, and then Doc from Star Trek beams down, and he's like, "You're gonna cut him open? You barbarian." And then I was like, oh my God, am I a barbarian now? And you gotta remember, like, if you think about old surgeons in older times, this is what the surgeon used to look like, you know, and I look at that guy, I'm like, that guy's a barbarian. I mean, now we're sophisticated. We use robots with little things that go in the belly. I make little tiny incisions. So I'm not a barbarian, am I? But I still am rearranging intestines and causing bleeding and other kind of things. And so it really makes you think. This is a famous cartoon. There was a doctor named Dr. Burkett who was a surgeon like me. And when you're a surgeon, you see diverticulitis and cholecystitis and appendicitis and heart disease and obesity. And he worked in England, and he noted in the 1940s that There was a population of Ugandans, and they had the same disease processes that the Anglo-Saxons had. So he asked a simple question. Do they have these problems in Uganda? And he went to Uganda, and he spent many years in Uganda. And he did crazy things in Uganda, like to go to Ugandan tribes and ask if he could weigh their poop. But he came to a very interesting conclusion. And he drew this cartoon, that we, as doctors, are mopping up a floor and not turning off the faucet. And that faucet is what we eat. We're eating the wrong foods. We're not eating enough fiber, was his conclusion from all those studies. And this has always stuck with me. But he missed a level of complexity and nuance. And that is that it's not so easy for the doctor to just drop the mop and turn off the faucet. It doesn't work like that. It's not that easy, and it's a lot more complicated, and that's what I want to talk to you guys about. Because we all have opinions, right? If you see my patient here, and you look at him, what is your opinion of him? When you see him, what do you think deep down inside if you really let yourself come up with an opinion? And we come up with a lot of opinions, right? We think all he needs to do is eat less and move more, right? Just eat less, move more. That'll do it. But does eat less, move more work? I mean, eat less, move more is what we want people to do, but that's the result of what our therapy should be. It's not a method in and of itself. If shame worked to get people to lose weight, we wouldn't have a huge obesity epidemic, but shame doesn't work. And simple things like eat less, move more don't work. Remember that show, The Biggest Loser? So that show was terrible, right? You take people, they're already self-conscious about their body. They make them strip down and get on a scale, which is their nemesis. Horrible show. I was seething angry with every episode that I still watched because I'm a masochist, but yeah. But so they did an interesting study because guess what? These people grow to put back on their weight. But what they found out something very interesting. If you look, so they started out like on an average of 148 kilograms, lost down to 90, now they're back up to 131 after 6 years. But look at this. Their metabolic rate was 2,607 calories a day. They burned 2,607 calories a day just at rest before they did the show. At the end of the competition, their metabolism had decreased despite all their exercise. And now, 6 years later, it never recovered. Exercise actually makes you decrease your metabolism, opposite of what you would think. And you know how it is, right? Everybody's like, oh, I'm just going to exercise away that, margarita or that cheeseburger. It just doesn't work. But first of all, try to get 700 calories out in a workout. That's a really hard workout. It just doesn't work that way. And yet, the number one thing we tell people that are obese to do, people that are really obese that have joint problems and can barely move, we're telling them to go run a marathon, as if that's going to solve the problem. Or we tell them to count calories. I started this way. I thought, okay, if you just count calories, everything's gonna be fine. And I had this elaborate setup in my office. You would come in, you'd have to breathe in a machine. I would get the exact calories you had. I would tell people, I want a scale. Can you imagine the life I set up for my patients back then? I want a scale. I want you weighing everything. And then I want you calculating and put in a book and come here for me to grade it. And yeah, how well did that work? And that doesn't work. They've done many studies, and you can see here, like these are the different subjects, and this is the reported intake. This is the unreported intake. And they're not lying, right? They're not lying, they just don't know. I mean, think about it. Pam cooking spray says that it is 0 calories. 0 calories and 0 fat. It's 100% fat. How do they get away with that? What is the serving size? 1/4 of a second of a spray. You pick up the thing, it says low fat, no calories. You're like, oh, all right, low fat, no calories. This hasn't worked, and we've tried it for years and years and years, and the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I feel terrible for Oprah, who's been going through this for years. And you know what it does create? It creates a sense of failure in the patient, and it also creates this obesity stigma. And the stigma is really important because most people look at someone who's overweight and they say, oh, they're fat and lazy. This is their fault. They just need to eat differently. And we need to be mindful of that because we are a little bit self-righteous, right? I mean, we're vegan. How many vegans? Self-righteous people. We get out there and we're like, do it my way. Everyone else is wrong. Just do it my way. And look, I'm just as guilty. I mean, every time I go out to dinner, my wife is like, she's like, please. I'm like, I promise I will not be the preachy vegan tonight. And 2 kombuchas later, I'm like, you know what you're eating right there? Can I show you a video of where your steak was a few months ago? And you know what? Diets, they don't work. You know, the people have been doing diets forever. People lose weight. You always lose weight, and then you put it back. Why? This was a great article in the New York Times. Why are we still so fat? And in this, she concluded that nothing works except bariatric surgery. That's the only solution we have, which is probably good for my business colleagues, but terrible for the state of the society. It's the only thing we have to rearrange the intestines. I think part of the problem is that we don't look at obesity as a disease. Most people in this country think obesity is a bad lifestyle habit and that the patient made it this way. And we come up with these terrible things like, it's not that diabetes and heart disease and obesity run in your family, it's that no one runs in your family. So if you just run, that's gonna fix it. Or this ridiculous PhD guy who said, dear obese PhD applicants, if you didn't have the willpower to stop eating carbs, you won't have the willpower to do a dissertation. Can you believe he said that on Twitter? And do you believe he said it's because of eating carbs? We'll get to that. My sincere apologies. Look, he apologized, but it's too late, right? It shows you the truth that matters. This is a real society problem we have with what we think is obesity. Now, what I want to tell you is that obesity is far more complex than you could possibly imagine, and unless you've walked a mile in the shoes of someone suffering from obesity, you cannot understand it. Because the simple thought of hunger, if we were going to say this is a thought process, a willpower, that's going to come from the cerebrum, the part of the brain that is consciously thinking. But hunger comes from the most primitive part of the brain, the part of the brain that controls heart rate, that controls breathing. And look, you might be able to hold your breath for a little bit, and you may be able to stop eating or go on a diet for a little bit, but eventually there are a whole bunch of hormones that are going to change things. Because our bodies evolved hundreds of thousands of years ago. Calorie excess is a blip in time of the human experience. We evolved a big, gigantic stomach. Why did we evolve a big, gigantic stomach? To get our dollar's worth at a buffet? No, because there was never food around. So if there was food, we better eat a lot of it and we better store it. And we've got hormones. Our stomach secretes a hormone that says, feed me, feed me, feed me. And a lot of this goes back into our genes. Our genes code for these kind of things. And there have been some very interesting genetic studies, best of all on twins. Look in a shared environment, a monozygotic twin versus a dizygotic twin. They live in the same environment, right? But look at the differences in size if it's a dizygotic twin versus a monozygotic twin. And they did this amazing studies in Holland. They had identical twins that were separated at birth and adopted into different families. And they looked at the different families and they looked at the twins. If they were identical twins, it didn't matter the lifestyle of the family. If one was overweight, the other one was going to be overweight. In fact, obesity is the most inherited gene we have, on par with height, but one of the most inherited genes that we have. And we've already started getting into the genomes. We're starting to really specify what genes there are and be able to predict people that are going to suffer from this. It's interesting because if you take, we've done a lot of interesting functional MRI studies where we've taken people that are obese and put them in a functional MRI and measure their brain, and taken people that are normal weight and put them in. And if you show a normal weight person, for instance, a cheeseburger, their brain might go meh, but you show a morbid obese person a cheeseburger and their brain's like, oh my God, it just lights up like crazy. Same thing as when you look at dopamine receptors in a normal person's brain. They got a lot of dopamine receptors along the arcuate nucleus. So what that means is dopamine is part of our pleasure centers and our satisfaction center. It's easy for this person to get satisfied. Any dopamine will activate it. But look at the brain of an obese person. No red, no dopamine receptors. Look at a cocaine user or an alcoholic. It's similar. And it's very hard for these people to feel satisfied after they eat. Now, a lot of this is genes. A lot of it's actually, we're finding out, epigenetic. In other words, you could change the baby's gene in utero. It is so important what the mother eats when she's pregnant. It actually can definitely affect some of these appetite regulatory genes. And you know what's really crazy? It affects, they've looked at this as smoking. If you have a daughter, it'll affect the eggs forming in the daughter so that when the daughter has a child, that child is affected by what its grandmother ate during the meal, which is really kind of crazy. And what are these appetite regulatory genes working on? They're working on all kinds of hormones that affect this part of the brain. There's a hormone called ghrelin that's secreted by the stomach. As you start fasting, like let's say you're going on a diet. You know, you go on a diet, right? And in the beginning, I feel great. I'm on a diet. And someone says, do you want this great vegan cookie? I don't want a cookie. I'm on a diet. But what happens 3 weeks later? You're like, oh my God, that cookie looks amazing. What's going on there? Is that willpower? No. Ghrelin is increasing. It increases very rapidly. Interestingly, when I reroute the intestines, it drops that ghrelin level considerably, which is part of the reason the surgeries work. We'll get to that later. There's another hormone called leptin. Our body didn't want us to lose fat. Fat was an important store to ensure that we survive. So when you lose weight, when you lose fat, fat secretes a hormone called leptin. When leptin level drops, your brain's like, oh my God, the leptin level's dropping. We're starving, we got to eat. And they've done all these studies. These two rats have different leptin receptors. Can you guess which one is leptin sensitive and which one isn't? The overweight one does not have a leptin receptor and is therefore overweight. Multiple different hormones that affect us. And in fact, it's not just hormones. We're now figuring out that it might have to do with bowel bacteria. The microbiome is a really fascinating thing, but we're finding that people that, we used to think that your microbiome was kind of like a fingerprint. So once you had your microbiome, it wasn't changing for the rest of your life. But then they did these really intricate studies. Do you know 2 weeks for a meat eater to switch to a vegan diet completely changes their microbiome. And it changes it to a very healthy microbiome. And we know it's not just what bacteria you have, but the diversity of bacteria that you have that may affect. And I don't know if you guys have heard the story. We are now doing transfusions. And what that is, it's really only FDA indicated right now for a bacteria called C. diff colitis. I don't know if you've heard about that, but it could become antibiotic resistant. You could get really bad diarrhea. And they found out that if you give someone good bacteria, it can reverse C. diff colitis. So there was a lady who was normal weight. She had bad C. diff colitis. She got a transfusion where they took the stool from her daughter-in-law, broke it down into little pills, and she swallowed it. Yeah, I know. And the C. diff went away, but guess what? Within 6 months, she was morbidly obese. And we looked at her, I always say we. I did not personally look at her stool or her microbiome, but her microbiome changed dramatically. We also know from weight loss surgery, by the way, it also increases the diversity. They were looking at weight loss surgery many years later. We'll get more into weight loss surgery later. And they were trying to figure out why people keep the weight off. And they found that it had a lot to do with the diversity of microbiome. The other thing that's really interesting is this hormone GLP-1. Now this hormone, when we do weight loss surgery, there's a hormone called GLP-1 that goes up. And this hormone has a lot of effects because it goes straight to that brain stem and says, okay, we've eaten enough. It also does something where, you know, when you eat, if you eat really fast, pretty soon, like 30 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I'm gonna throw up, I ate too much. That's because GLP-1's coming in. And GLP-1's like, stop eating, you've had enough. And scientists have been working on this and they now have come up with drugs that are GLP-1 agonists. They look like GLP-1, it's a shot once a week. It may be the end of weight loss surgery eventually. These medications work exceedingly well. It's amazing. So it's another argument against the idea that this is a willpower issue, because you could take a person who is on a diet and they're not doing very well and they could give themselves a shot once a week and that's it. That's all they're doing, a shot once a week, forget about it. And all of a sudden their weight is just dropping. Now, in the study they did, their weight was dropping, and these few poor people right here, they switched out their shot to a placebo. So they didn't even know they were getting the placebo. They were like, oh, this med is working great. And all of a sudden the weight comes right back on. No change in willpower, right? No change in anything. They just gave them a placebo and the weight comes on. Now the problem that we're seeing here is, you can guess, right? These meds work well, but gotta take them forever. And that could be really expensive. And, I've seen many, my theory is if I could use the medication to get them to change their diet to a healthy diet, which we'll get to, that they then won't have to use the medication. And in theory, that's great. In practice, doesn't always work that way. But hunger is complex. We go on a diet, like I'm going to save the other half of the sandwich for later, and then 2:06, time to finish that sandwich. Our minds are working against us constantly. Now, I've made this all about genes and genetics, but it can't just all be about genes and genetics, right? Because we're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Obesity is becoming more and more of a problem every year. It is not stopping. So we got to be doing something to do this, right? I beat anorexia. So the identical twin studies support that genes influence body weight and fat. However, obesity epidemic cannot be blamed just on the human genome. Weight gain results from an interaction between the genes and the environment. If you look at what we're eating in this country, you could argue about all kinds of things, but I could tell you one thing. We're eating more and more calories every single year, and it continuously increases. Now, why is that? Well, have you heard that quote, the problem we have is that we're fed by a food industry that doesn't care about health, and we're treated by a health industry that doesn't care about food. And when you look at it, the government has a pretty decent plate, right? It says eat fruits, vegetables, grains. They're even saying now this protein should be plant protein. Who knows why? Well, we know why they say dairy, but anyway. But this is what the plate, fairly reasonable. But where do our tax dollars go? They don't go to fruit and vegetables. Fruit and vegetables get a tiny fraction of the amount of money that really goes to protein and dairy and all those kind of things. And because of that, a burger is 99 cents. A burger should really cost about $15, but it's 99 cents. The dairy industry was basically broke a few years ago until they got $20 billion from the government to save them, because we're killing dairy with our beautiful soy and oat milks and things like that. And then you got this is me at a marathon. I'm at a marathon, and Ronald McDonald is the host of it. It's this yeah. And Ronald's all excited. He's like, you want to take a picture with me? I'm like, yeah, I want to take a picture with you, you joke. And we don't even understand exercise. Look at these guys taking escalator to the thing, and we're all unhappy and we're mad and we're angry, and that of course leads to depression, which leads to poor eating behaviors because we got to stimulate those dopamine receptors. And you can even look at obesity by zip codes. Isn't this crazy? Certain zip codes have more obesity because there's food deserts where the only thing you could get is a cheeseburger, and you can't get good food, which is, thank you for your work in the third ward, which otherwise would not be eating healthy foods and would be this way. The other big problem is people they have no idea what's healthy anymore. There's so much argument online. And the more you argue, the more you cast doubt. You got low carb versus low fat. So is it carbs or is it fat? Which is it that's causing obesity? And of course, if you're arguing about carbs or fat, that leaves one macronutrient that can rise to the top, which is just eat protein. And that's the number one tip everybody gives. Eat more protein. Oh, you're overweight, eat more protein. You want to gain weight? Drink a protein shake. You want to lose weight? Drink a protein shake. It's crazy, the nonsense out there. And look, we eat more protein than any other country in the world, right? And way more animal protein, which is superior by what you hear online. And so with all that protein, there's a lot of argument about the RDA. So the RDA for a male is 56 grams of protein, for a female, 46 grams of protein. And there's people like, no, we need higher. It should be 80 to 100 grams of protein. And they argue like crazy about this. What's the average protein intake for an adult male? 110 to 120. We're way surpassing the RDA. Arguing about what the RDA should be is moot point. And what does this get us? We're the sickest country in the world. We spend more money than any country in the world on healthcare, even countries that have socialized medicine. Do you know that while we're 5% of the world's population, we represent 75% of the prescription drug usage in the world, 75%. It's absolutely crazy. And we're the most overweight. We are the dieting country of the world. No one diets more than we do, and yet we're the most obese country in the world. And somehow this doesn't set off alarms in people's minds. And there's this protein drives you to just eat more meat. Well, there was a humongous study done in Europe because they're starting to catch up with us, right? They're starting to get overweight too. Follow 500,000 people, and they followed them for 12 years. And what was the number one food causing weight gain? Meat. Specifically, when you really get into the data of this study, specifically poultry. Which is weird, right? Because people think, my patients are like, oh, I'm eating healthy. I'm eating clean. I love it when they call chicken clean. Because you prepare the chicken using tongs and a hazmat suit. But it's clean. And the problem is the way we appropriate diet to begin with. We go by macronutrients. Like, no longer what is eating protein? I mean, all foods have protein in it. All foods have amino acids in it, but the problem with nutrient by nutrient nutrition science is it takes nutrient out of the context of food, food out of the context of the diet, and the diet out of the context of lifestyle. People don't know what to eat anymore. This really started back, we don't need to go too much into the history, but the Senate Select Committee on Nutrition in the 1960s to 70s, they were supposed to study malnutrition. They found out there's not that much malnutrition, but there's a whole bunch of overnutrition. We're too obese. And so they studied this in detail, and they came up with the conclusion that we need to eat less eggs, meat, and dairy, and more grains. And guess what happened? The egg, meat, and dairy industry went crazy. They're like, you can't say don't eat more or less egg, meat, and dairy. And they actually got the recommendations changed from eat less meat to eat more lean meat. And all of a sudden this term lean came in, and all of a sudden this term low fat came in, and then we had the low fat guidelines. It became low fat. And what happened? We still got obese on low fat guidelines because, of course, we weren't ever eating low fat, right? Our fat intake increased just as much over the years. We ate more meat, eggs, we ate more oils. We never went low fat, but we did eat more reduced fat Oreo cookies because that was somehow healthy. And the other thing that's crazy is there is bad science out there. Really bad science. So they'll have a low fat versus low carb diet, and they'll say, oh, look at this. Over time, the low carb diet lost more weight than the low fat diet. But wait a second. The low fat diet wasn't low fat. It was 30% fat, and they started at 35% fat. They hardly changed their diet at all. Whereas the low carb diet made a drastic change in their diet. That's not fair. Or this study, which this was a study that was passed around a lot. Dietary carb restriction improves metabolic syndrome. Sounds good. If you restrict your carbs, your metabolism is going to do fantastic. Now, the results, they say that this works really well for treating metabolic syndrome. And if you just read the abstract, you'd be like, wow, low carb works. Now, you might want to spend a few minutes on their conflicts of interest, where they get money from Atkins and from dairy. And then when you start really getting into the detail, almost nothing changed between the low carb and the low fat, the high carb group. Almost nothing. The only thing that changed is there was a slight drop in triglycerides. HDL went up. Now, let me tell you something. Everybody talks about, oh, good cholesterol. Matters not. There's been a million studies on this. Increasing good cholesterol does not improve heart health at all, but we better, they're like, we better show this because nothing else happened in the study. And then the other thing that happened in the study was that the size of the LDL particle changed, and they're like, this is all we got to go with, let's make a big article about it. And people fell for it, but it really didn't show much. Now, I want you to see what the high carb group ate. So Cinnamon Life cereal for breakfast with some egg beaters and Gouda cheese. Lunch was diced ham with a russet potato and marshmallow fluff. A little nice snack of Gouda cheese and deli turkey. That's the high carb diet that they were comparing to. That's how you set up. No one reads this part of it. They're not the nerds like me, right? Who's like, let me see exactly what they were feeding these people. And it's easy to dupe someone when they don't know these facts. Here was ignore this stuff right now, okay? They published a study and they said, look, people that aren't on ketosis don't burn as much fat as people that are on ketosis when they exercise. Now, it was two different studies, and they were comparing two different studies. This study had 300 people in it, exercising 15 to 35 minutes. This had 5 people in it, and they exercised for 2.5 hours. It's not apples and oranges, but if I took these things away and just put this on my Instagram, people would be like, wow, ketosis works. And that's kind of the part of the problem that we have. And you got people writing books. This guy, oh. This guy writes a book that plants are bad for you. And that the worst thing for you is lectins, and you should never eat beans. Unless you could eat beans if you take his $200 lectin binding thing available on his website. Beans are bad for you. Okay. This study was one of the biggest studies ever on beans, and it showed that beans are the most important dietary predictor of survival in older people. How possibly can you say that beans are bad for you if it is the number 1 predictor of longevity? And yet people are just free to just lie now, just outright lie. I see this stuff and I'm like, I'm speechless. That's why I'm so angry on Instagram. And all this carb fear. I mean, people fear carb. Every patient I talk to, I had a patient come to see me. She's like, I don't know, why I'm gaining weight, but I think it's carbs. And I look at her diet list and it's like eggs for breakfast, chicken for lunch, and steak for dinner. I'm like, there's no carbs in your diet. And she's like, well, once in a while, she was from Ghana. And she's like, once in a while, I get together with my friends from Ghana. We have a traditional Ghana meal where it's got lots of, fibers and beans and things like that. And I'm looking at her, I'm like, have you been to Ghana? And she's like, yeah. I was like, was there anybody obese in Ghana? No, nobody was obese. She's like, in fact, I lost weight when I was in Ghana. Yeah, it's not the carbs. There's been many studies showing carbs don't increase weight. In fact, if you look around the world at the healthiest cultures in the world, look at the blue zones. Are they avoiding carbs? No, in Okinawa, they eat mainly sweet potatoes and rice. That's the vast majority of their calorie intake is beans and rice. And they lose weight over time instead of us who gain weight as we get older. In fact, they did a study where they put people in a hospital ward and they kept feeding them more and more and more carbs, and they didn't gain any fat because your body can't turn carbs to fat. It's very hard, called de novo lipogenesis, and it just doesn't happen. Now, the fact of the matter is just any diet is hard to stick to. People just don't stick to diets. Like in this study, Ornish group didn't do very well, right? And they should, because that's a plant-based diet. But if you look at what they were eating, they weren't eating an Ornish diet. Ornish went crazy when the study came out. He was like, they're not eating what I tell them to eat. They're not doing it. Because most people just stop eating this, and a lot of it has to do with those hormones we were talking about. Dr. Gardner did a very good study. He took a group of people and put them on a healthy low-fat diet and a healthy low-carb diet. It was very well controlled. It was 1 year, and there was no difference between the low-carb and the low-fat group. They ate pretty much the same diet, and they lost the same amount of weight, which averaged to not be a lot of weight. Now, the most weight that's been lost in a 1-year study was the broad diet. Have you guys heard of the broad diet? Study done in New Zealand. They took a group of people, and they said you could eat any plant food you want, all right? Any of these foods you could eat. Sparingly on these foods, no meat, poultry, eggs, or fish. Most weight loss ever. And the people were full, and they felt great, and they were very happy with their weight loss. And we should know that would work because we knew this many years ago. Dr. Walter Kempner, in the 1930s, if you had obesity or diabetes or hypertension, you had no treatment, you died, unless you went to Duke and got treated by Dr. Kempner. And what did he do? Anybody know? Rice diet. Rice and fruit. That was all you could eat. Weight dropped like crazy. People had unbelievably great results. Now, the problem was Dr. Kempner tended to whip patients if they ate anything but. And he lost his license. And so I've put my whip away. But, I mean, these kind of plant-based, high-fiber diets, we know they work. There's been many different studies on this. There's been meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. You can see with most of these studies in this forest plot that most of them have, pretty good weight loss. We're looking at 6 to 8%, maybe 10% weight loss. Those are pretty good numbers. Most of the blue zones are eating a predominantly plant-based diet, and they don't have any problems with obesity. And that EPIC study I showed you, in Europe, where they followed 500,000 people, the vegans by far had the lowest body mass index in weight. So we should know that this works. The Adventist Health study, where they followed 60,000 Adventist health people over 30 years, and you could see that the more plant-based you were, the lower your body mass index was, and the lower your diabetes was. Mediterranean diet that everybody's talking about is basically a plant-based diet. It's very high in carbs, very high in fruits and vegetables. And the reason this works is, well, there's many reasons, but one of them is calorie density, right? It's how much it fills up your stomach there are nerves that go to the stomach that go back to that primitive part of the brain and say, yeah, this person's eating. You can't fill up your stomach much with oil, but you can with fruit and vegetables. And I told you calorie counting doesn't work. But if you look at calorie, so I don't calorie count with my patients anymore, but I do go over with them calorie density. And I say, these foods, I don't care how much you eat. Eat until you're full, because they're so low in calories that you're going to eat till you're full and still not get that many calories. And that's because they're full of fiber. Fiber is what's going to really make you full. What is the most filling food you could possibly eat? They did this study. They had people eat different foods and see what would make them full, and the most filling food that was kind of just way out there was potatoes. The one thing everybody avoids is the most filling food that you could do. There were these great studies done by this lady, Barbara Rolls, and she said, what really matters is how much food you take in. That's what's going to give you satiety, okay? So if I could give someone the same amount of food but vary the energy density, I could decrease how much calories they take in. So the grams of food they eat could be the same, but the calories could be different. And she did that by adding vegetables. The more vegetables she put in, the lower the calorie density. So she was making soups. And she found that you could give someone a soup with lower calories and they feel just as full as a soup with higher calories just by adding vegetables and fiber into it. Her diet's called the volumetric diet. Really good. And it kind of goes into how to feel full by eating higher fiber foods. Of course, going back to the gut microbiome, we're improving the gut microbiome with plants because they like to eat fiber and resistant starches. And what's interesting is we have found, now remember that drug I told you is going to change the face of weight loss, the GLP-1? Guess what? Plants increase GLP-1. And so you can get that GLP-1 effect by eating a high plant-based diet. And I think a lot of you know that because you're plant-based eaters, and we feel full. I'm not hungry right now after my oatmeal breakfast that I had. And that's going to be really important if we're going to help someone lose weight. There's a lot of people that have been morbidly obese and have changed it. You guys know Josh. He called me many years ago and asked me about weight loss surgery, and I would have told him, yeah, you ought to do weight loss surgery. But he didn't do weight loss surgery. He did a plant-based diet, and he was very successful. But if you know him, he's an exception to the rule in many ways. I think everybody should be eating a plant-based diet. I think we could really do a big, globally benefit for our environment, for the animals, but also for obesity if everybody's eating a plant-based diet. But when I am sitting in an exam room with a morbidly obese patient who's been overweight since they were a kid, who went to fat camps as a child, it often doesn't work. I love my job because I get to help people make unbelievable life changes. I'm not a cosmetic surgeon. I don't do this because it makes people look pretty. I do this because obesity has a lot of medical implications. Being overweight causes cancer. Being overweight causes heart disease. Being overweight causes sleep apnea and all these other problems. And bariatric surgery does fix these things. At one point, when I'd written Proteinaholic, I was fanatical. And I said, maybe we should never do surgery. Now, my partner at the time was my father. And my father was an old curmudgeon surgeon, and definitely not plant-based. And I said to him, I think people should be treated with plant-based. I think we should probably not do surgery or do surgery only if they haven't done plant-based. He's like, that's malpractice. Now that sounds crazy for my father to say it's malpractice to do a plant-based diet, right? But he said, people are dying from obesity. We have a treatment that cures these problems. We know it from years and years of study, and you're giving them something that we can't prove. And I said, well, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to start a plant-based diet group, and let's see how they do. And they did okay. But did they do as well as my father's patients? Not even close. Not even close. And so I have to keep this in mind when I'm treating a patient. NIH looked at this in 1991, and they said there's no question that surgery makes a very good effect on obesity. There's been huge studies on the surgery effect. The surgeries are extremely safe. They cause weight loss. Now, remember I told you the plant-based diet was doing pretty well with 10% weight loss? How would you like 63%? They did this study where they followed 30 years. They followed people now. One group did a medical weight loss program, and one group did the surgery. And they've taken this out 30 years, and it keeps changing. The surgery group lives about 10 years longer than the group that didn't do surgery in age match and weight match controls. All these large meta-analyses show just amazing weight losses with these surgeries. There is some weight regain you'll see over time, but still it's way higher than the 10% we were talking about with diets and stuff like that. Who would have thought it? Surgery is the 1 treatment for diabetes. It absolutely cures it in the vast majority of people. There's been multiple big studies on this. There's been a couple big studies where they decided, okay, we're gonna do a strong lifestyle intervention. Exercise, we're gonna use some medications, and we're gonna do diet. Now the diet isn't vegan, but they use DASH diet, which is very high in plant-based. I mean, it's a pretty good diet, the DASH diet. These were the results. Here's the lifestyle with medical management versus the gastric bypass, or A1C, which is diabetes. So all the patients started off very diabetic, but you could see much better A1C level, much better blood pressure. Lifestyle just didn't come anywhere close in any of these randomized trials. Again, this is the lifestyle. This is the gastric band. This is the bypass. And this was the biggest study that was done. It was a 5-year study done out of Cleveland Clinic, where Cleveland Clinic, they really are pretty confident about their weight loss medication treatment. And you can see here's their weight loss medication treatment group. They didn't lose any weight. Actually, they gained a little bit of weight. And really, the main study was to see who could do the best at diabetes, and no one came close. And so, this is a famous saying by surgeons: a chance to cut is a chance to cure. I hate that saying because it's so cocky. But a chance to cut is a chance to cure at some times. You can't just go in and get a weight loss surgery. You have to go through dietary counseling. I make them read all kinds of plant-based material. They have to meet with our psychologist and our exercise therapist. We do, the funny thing about it is we studied this. If someone loses weight before surgery, are they going to do better after surgery than someone who actually gains weight before surgery? Seems like they would, right? No, makes no difference. So, and that again goes back to these hormones, because the person that's not doing well, and I always feel kind of bad because here comes a person who's like, I've dieted all my life and I can't lose weight. I'm like, well, before I give you the surgery that's going to help you lose weight, I'm going to put you on a diet. I'm like, but diet doesn't work. No, my diet's going to work. And then my diet doesn't work, but then they do the surgery and they do fantastic. And they actually, funny enough, are more likely to follow my diet. Now, why are they more likely to follow my diet after surgery? They're not as hungry. It's a lot easier to pass up the McDonald's when your brain isn't like, give me McDonald's. And so that's why we see this. There's several different surgeries out there. There's a gastric band. This didn't work. We're going to wrap a band around your stomach and try to limit how much you eat. This was like forced bulimia. And funny enough, people got hungrier. Ghrelin level went up because we're not doing anything to the hormones. You're just not eating as much. Nothing happened to that GLP-1, and people just became hungrier. And that surgery didn't work. The gastric bypass is the standard surgery. Remember I told you we evolved this big, gigantic stomach? Well, what we do is we create a small stomach, and we divert food away from the pancreas, and that causes that GLP-1 to go up and ghrelin level to go down. Not as hungry, can't eat as much. Similar things happen with the sleeve. Again, we evolved this big, gigantic stomach. Let's just remove it. Seems barbaric, but it works. People lose a lot of weight with it. There's another surgery called a duodenal switch for our super huge patients. What we do is we bypass. The intestine is too long. It's made to absorb calories all the way down. In some people, they just absorb too many calories. And so here we cut that off, and they lose a lot of weight. Very low risks, especially if done in a good place. And so you take a patient like this. I told him to do a plant-based diet. This is a Texas boy. And he had already had one weight loss surgery, the band. It wasn't working. He said, I'll do anything, I promise. And he goes, I'm going to be successful. And a year after the surgery, I'm going to do a triathlon, and I'm going to make you do it with me. And so I did the surgery, and here we are crossing the finish line of a triathlon. And he actually did an Ironman, and he carried the picture of himself across the finish line. And here he is here. So, and he's just one of many examples. I tell my patients, you got to rethink food, right? We're going to do surgery, but you got to, what comes to the stake? Cancer, heart disease. You got to rethink your food. Here's a patient that they thought they were doing well, 3 boiled eggs, a turkey sandwich, turkey for dinner. You got to rethink the way you do protein. I don't tell them they have to be vegan, but they have to flip the protein. More fruits, more vegetables, more beans. This is medicine. Eat the nutrition pyramid, more vegetables and fruits and beans. Breakfast should look like this, lunch like this, a snack like this. Easy, cheap dinners to make that are delicious. and easy to do. So that's a lot of information. I hope I was able to give you some wisdom through this. And hopefully this will be the doctor of the future. I want you to meditate for 20 minutes twice a day, exercise for 30 minutes, avoid processed food, eat plenty of organic fruits and vegetables, spend more time in nature, less indoors, stop worrying about things you can't control, ditch your TV and phone, and come back and see me in 3 weeks. Thanks, guys.